Hello everyone, this is Joe from Scarecrow Joe's Studio, and if you have been following along on my paper mache skull and books tutorial, this is going to be part 6. It's the final segment of this tutorial where it's all about painting and then sealing your sculptures. As you can see, I have already begun this process by basing the entire sculpture out in black paint, including the bottom of the books here. So all around it's just black paint. I use a latex indoor house paint. I buy these in gallons. I use a lot of black paint. So if you use a lot of black paint, that's the most economical way to go about it. If you don't use a lot of black paint, you can get a quart or a few ounces of black paint and it'll probably be fine for this. But right now we're going to go ahead and move on, and I'm going to show you the next steps in the painting process. Alright, next step in this, after basing it out in black paint and of course allowing it to dry completely, is I'm going to go ahead and take some white acrylic paint. This is just a cheap apple barrel matte white acrylic craft paint. And I have a piece of newspaper here. And I have this is a 1-inch chip brush that I have cut the bristles down. I like to cut the bristles down on these when I do dry brushing because it allows me, I believe, a little bit more control in dry brushing. So I'm going to go ahead and put some of this white paint on my newspaper. Not going to really need a whole lot of it, but I'm going to dip my brush in there, and this is a dry brush technique. And if you have watched some of my other videos where I finish up these tutorials by painting, you will have already watched me use this technique. So if you don't feel like watching it again, then by all means skip this part. But I like to start on the back of my sculptures and just gently I'm going to go in and dry brush on the entire thing with this white acrylic paint, front and back, even the pages in here. I'm going to dry brush the entire thing with this white paint. Alright, as you can see, I got my books here all dry brushed with the white paint. I did make sure that anything exposed on the bottoms here, not so much the very bottom of the base book here or your first book. I mean, you could go ahead and paint that too if you want. I'm leaving it, no one's going to see it. But all of these edges underneath that people will see, you're going to want to dry brush those areas too. So really make sure you go around, turn your books, turn your sculpture, look at the edges underneath to make sure you get dry brush on those. The only thing left for me to dry brush with the white paint is my skull. Once again, I'm going to start on the back of the skull. And I'm going to get just, I'm going to knock off the majority of this paint. I'm just going to start on the bottom and kind of make my way up. I love dry brush technique, especially on paper mache clay, because it brings out a lot of the textures in this clay. And you could probably already see where we put those cranial markings in. By dry brushing over, it's bringing those markings out quite a bit. Piece of advice when dry brushing, start very light, with very, very light, not a whole lot of paint on your paintbrush, because once it dries and you may find that there are some areas where you didn't put enough, or you feel like you didn't put enough of the dry brush paint on there, you can always go back and dry brush a little bit more in those areas. It's easier to apply than it is to take off, because you can't really take it off unless, you know, you're going to paint the whole thing over again, or that section over again in black, or whatever base color you have. So that's just a piece of advice there. I've completed pretty much the back of that. Now on the face, I want my eye sockets, my nasal cavity to fade to black. So I'm not really going to put any dry brush in there. I'll probably get a little bit of white paint in there, not a big deal, because I'm going to go back over it and black those out again. So, but on the face, this is really cool. I'm going to just start again, the bottom here. And again, you can see all of the texture, all of those textural elements that we put in here. That dry brush brings out all of it. So really, really cool technique. I'm not really concentrating on putting any kind of white paint in between, you know, these areas here where the teeth are, because I kind of want those to just fade into darkness or fade into black. So basically I'm just highlighting not so much the recessed areas. You could see here where I put in those marks there, you know, to kind of give it a look of, you know, when this person was alive, maybe he or she sustained an injury to their skull, and you could see that in that by using this dry brush technique after you've sculpted in those areas. So really cool technique. That's why I really enjoy it. I'm going to carry on and finish up dry brushing the rest of the skull. Alright, so that's all finished up. I just wanted to point out a couple of things here. On the sides of my skull, where these indentations are, in this area, on both sides here, I went very, very light with the white dry brush, because I want these recessed areas to fade a little darker than the rest of the skull, to give it some shadow while I'm highlighting, you know, the raised areas that I want to show more pronounced. This is going to dry relatively quickly with this acrylic paint. It dries pretty quick, and there's not a whole lot of paint on here. It's not thick at all, so I'd still give it about, I don't know, before you carry on, maybe give it at least a half an hour. That's what I'm going to do, because I don't want to muddy the rest of my paint that I'm going to dry brush some more on, and different colors on this piece. Alright, just a brief interruption in my regularly scheduled program. I just want to talk to you a little bit about my upcoming tutorial on how to make gargoyles, and it's going to look something like this. Yes, gargoyles, one of my favorite things. So we're going to do a smaller version than that. That one's a really big one, and I do have it to show you in the next tutorial when we start to build the armature for that. But in the meantime, let's get back to this one. Alright, I just want to show you the colors of paints that I have on hand that I'm going to use to paint my books. I'm going to concentrate on painting my book covers first, and then after that I will concentrate on painting the pages. The first thing I'm going to start out with is I have this little container here, and I squirted in some of this burnt umber. Again, this is cheap Apple Barrel matte acrylic craft paint, and I have my paintbrush. As always, I'm going to start on the bottom, And I'm gonna kind of knock some of this paint off. I have another piece of newspaper here, so I'm gonna knock off a bunch of it. I'm gonna start on the bottom, and I'm basically just sort of dry brushing some of this burnt umber. This is a darker brown. I had to pause there for a second because I realized that I didn't have my lighting set up the way it should be. So hopefully in that last frame, these next frames are going to be a little bit brighter, easier for you to see. Anyway, this burnt umber here, I'm just kind of dry brushing over the white. Again, I'm not painting the bottom of this bottom book at all. I'm leaving it black. But anything that may show, like right here on the edges, I'm going to make sure that I go in and paint those areas as well. So again, very lightly, the covers of all the books, make sure again that you come underneath all of them and you dry brush some on to the bottoms as well. Anything that is showing, you want to dry brush that on. All right, my burnt umber dry brush over the white dry brush has been allowed to dry completely. Before I move on, I wanted to bring out my other Skull and Books sculpture that has already been completed. And as you can see, they're pretty much the same. They look pretty much the same right now. They're both the same color books. I want to change this up a little bit and experiment with another dry brush color on top of this burnt umber brown. And this color that I'm using is a burnt sienna. And again, this is another acrylic craft paint. I have a smaller, stiff bristled artist brush that I'm going to be using on this guy. But I'm going to get him out of the way so I don't get any splatter on it. And then I'm going to start on this. Alright, and as usual, I'm going to turn this and start and on the back here. Once again, I have my little my little container of paint, and then my newspaper. I'm going to knock a bunch of this off of here. I think this might give it a really kind of a cool look to it. Bring out some of this, like this brick kind of orange. And you know, if I hate it, I could go back over it with some additional brown to kind of cover it up. But I have a feeling I'm gonna like this. So I'm gonna give it a try here. And once again, just dry brush just the covers of my books, nothing else. All right, I have to say that I do like this burnt sienna color that I dry brushed over that brown burnt umber paint. I like the way it looks. And before we move on, or before I move on to the pages and then the skull, I wanted to show you something here. So this is an old leather-bound book here that I picked up at a vintage bookstore a while back. It's the complete works, or not the complete works, but the works of Poe, Edgar Allan Poe. And as you can see, you know, it's worn. It's definitely leather, okay, the binding, and it's worn in some areas. So you could definitely go in with some other paint and around, you know, some of the edges here, you could put in some of that paint, bring out a little bit of that, blend it in a little bit, just around some of those edges if you are so inclined. So I do like the way it looks. I'm going to tilt it this way, and hopefully you could see where the dry brush technique here really comes into play with bringing out the textures and over all of these different colors. So I had the solid black on there, and then I dry brushed white, and then I dry brushed some burnt umber brown over that. And then I dry brushed some of this burnt sienna. And I like the way it looks, but you could see definitely all the different layers of the paint. You could see some of the black coming through. You can also see some of the flecks of white coming through. You can see the brown, that dark brown coming through, and then as well as that burnt sienna reddish color. So I really like that effect. I think it lends it a lot more interest, in my opinion, in making them look more old. So on that note, I'm going to get my vintage book here out of the way so that I don't get any paint on it. And then I'm going to go ahead and start addressing the pages. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with leaving the pages as they are. It looks fine. So if that's the look that you like, the way that that looks, then leave it. However, I want to add a little bit more color and maybe some depth to that. Sorry, one more time, bringing back my my old book here. These pages here, they're starting to yellow. So I want to kind of add a little bit of that coloration into these books here. So what I have done is, in a little container here, I have mixed up some nutmeg brown acrylic paint with some white acrylic paint and a little bit of King's Gold acrylic paint. So once again, this is what I'm going to try. I'm going to knock off, I have my newspaper here. I'm going to give this a go. I'm just going to come in and dry brush in those areas, and I can already tell that it's going to look better, I think, than just having the white dry brushed over the black. So I do like that look. Now, if you get to a point where you know you're not liking it, again, you could just repaint those areas, not a big deal, or cover it up with some other kind of a paint on top of that to darken it, maybe a little bit more of a darker brown or something like that. But we have this really cool texture in here, making it look old, that we put in there when the clay was wet, and we took our little sculpting tools, or if you used a toothpick or a skewer, all of those things, and we put in that texture to make it look old. So this is really just bringing out more of that texture. And you really do want to bring out that texture because, you know, you've done all of this work and getting that texture in there and, you know, carving that in, and you took all that time. So really bring it out. Take a little bit more time and bring that out if you don't like this, just the white over that black, you know, dry brush look. And that's simply all that I'm doing. Lending the pages a little bit more interest, maybe making them look a little bit more old, kind of disintegrating. And again, as I'm doing this, you could see where the black is still coming through, the white is still coming through, but I'm just adding a little bit more colorization to the pages. All right, one thing that I want to bring to your attention before I move on to the skull is that, and a lot of you probably already know this, acrylic paint and pretty much any paint, once you put the color on there, when it dries, the wet look or the wet colorization of that paint is not going to be the same when it dries. The colorization is going to be different. So keep that in mind. The other thing that you need to keep in mind, and what I highly suggest, is that you know, in between these drying times, take your piece into different types of light. Take it outside into the sunlight. Lower the lights, see what it looks like. Because depending on where you're going to display your piece and how you're going to display your piece and what lighting you're going to have, all those things are something to consider. Just putting that out there. So very last thing that I'm going to move on to is painting the skull here. And I'm going to use, it's the same paint The only thing that I did was I added more white to it. So it's going to be a little paler than the pages here. So once again, I like to start in the back of the skull. I'm going to use that same brush and knock down some of the paint. I'm just going to start underneath here just to kind of see what it's going to look like. Now, you know, again, there's nothing wrong with the way that this skull looks now. You could totally leave it like this if you like it. I'm doing this because to me it looks like leaving it like this, it makes it look like it's carved out of some type of stone, maybe granite or something, and that's just not the look that I'm personally going for. I want it to look more like a little bit more realistic. So I'm gonna go in and put in this color here, and I'm gonna allow it to dry and then see what it looks like. I may need to lighten up in some areas, darken up in some areas, but again, you know, we're doing this, or I'm doing this, and if you're watching this, you could see the textures that are coming through in this skull, and it's pretty cool. It's just adding more and more depth, a little bit more realism when you're painting these things, you know, and you can go lighter, you can go darker, you know, whatever your heart desires. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take the time to really, this is going to be kind of a heavier dry brush in a lot of areas. I'm not so much going to go over and heavy dry brush with this color in my cranial markings so much, because I want those to kind of stand out in the background. But everything else, I'm going to go a little bit heavier on this. Alright, so I took the time, I dry brushed in that paint that I mixed up. The other thing that I did to kind of bring out in these side indentations here, a little tiny bit down in here, and a little bit in these areas here, was while this lighter paint was still a little bit tacky, I went in with a little tiny bit of, and I mean a tiny bit, of this nutmeg brown on the same brush that I was using for this color. And I just came in and darkened it a little bit with that brown. It was a very, very dry brush so that I can blend in these areas. So it doesn't look like I just slapped some paint in a little circle there. So I did it in strategic little places. It's very subtle, but I think it will enhance the piece, bring out a little bit more of those textures. But this is pretty much done. A couple other things that I need to do with my black paint after all of this is dry. I don't want to handle it so much right now until it's completely dry. I'm going to go in, and because I did get some dry brush, different colors inside the eye cavities, the nasal cavity. I want to darken those up again with my black paint. You want to seal your art. You always want to seal your paper mache sculptures. I always do. Whether I intend on, you know, displaying them outside or keeping them inside as some sort of a Halloween decoration or display, for a couple of different reasons. You want to seal them to protect them from any kind of weather. You know, it's not going to make them completely, you know, waterproof, but it will certainly help to protect them against water damage or anything like that. And also, you know, things they have a tendency to gather dust. And if you don't seal your paper mache sculpture, especially if you're using acrylic paint, what will happen is that you can't take a light damp cloth or anything like that and kind of wipe off dust, because it'll take that paint right off with it. But if you use something like this, and this is a spar urethane, it's a clear satin. You know, they make them in glossy, but don't get a gloss because it's going to be very, very glossy. Even the clear satin will have kind of a shine to it, but it's not that big of a deal to me. But it's going to protect your piece. So that's what I highly recommend. And I'm not going to spray this right now. I don't think you need me to show you how to spray spar urethane onto your piece. But word of advice is make sure that you're doing it in a well-ventilated area. Outdoors is best. No wind or anything like that. There's a lot of fumes, odors, things like that, and you definitely don't want to breathe them in an enclosed space. So that's my tip on that. And anyway, that is a wrap, except for one little detail. I want to take the candlestick out of my other guy back there and insert it in here, show you what that looks like. I did manage to get this one a little bit more centered than my other one back there, so I'm really happy. I'm pleased with that. So yeah, there you have it. That's the end of this tutorial. If you followed along from start to finish, thank you for watching. Next tutorial coming up is going to be gargoyles. I'm going to show you how to make a paper mache gargoyle. They're one of my favorite creatures, and if you enjoy gargoyles and you're interested in learning how to make a paper mache gargoyle using various tools, materials, and techniques for paper mache, stay tuned because that's going to be coming up real soon. But in the meantime, as always, I thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.